How are you all doing? You are all very welcome to our chat this evening about the Leaving Cert. I'm Niall Breslin, or Bressie, which most people refer to me as, and I am the co-founder of Us for Life. And we started Us for Life for many different reasons, but predominantly what we want to do is create a paradigm shift in how we address the human condition and how we talk about mental health and how we treat and how we deal with it. And for me, I've always believed that the probably greatest weapon of choice to do that is our youth, and through our education systems and through empowering young people, because I feel that they're the generation who can finally destroy the stigma that destroyed my generation. And I'm not being dramatic. That's the reality of it. And we're here to talk about what is the utter shit show, which was 2020 and 2021 Leaving Cert, and the ins and outs, ups and downs about the most important people in this entire conversation, which is the students. And the main stakeholders in this situation are the students. And that's what we want to talk about today. So I'm going to let Cian introduce himself, and then we're going to roll into some questions, and then we're going to do a Q&A at the end. So if anyone has any questions or any juicy ins and outs that they want to get to, you can just put them in the chat box, and Ciara's going to moderate all that, and she's going to ask us then at the end of it. So whatever you want to ask, get it in there around the Leaving Cert, about coping strategies, about things that I might be able to help you with, and maybe things Cian might be able to help you with. So Cian, if you want to rock on and give everybody I've just given them your name, but if you want to do it again.
No worries, thanks, Bressie. So my name's Cian Costello, and I'm a student in Gaelclosh and Clore in Ennis, County Clare. And on the 6th of January, I made an Instagram video talking about my frustration with the situation with our exams. I remember last year looking at the Leaving Cert 2020s and just being thankful that wasn't me, and just knowing in the back of my head that we'd be sorted for our Leaving Cert. But history repeats itself, and we found ourselves in arguably an even worse space. So I took to social media expressing my frustration, my views, and the video blew up. And since then, I've been doing my best to voice the frustration and the concerns of my year, and to ensure we get fairness and got the choice that we deserved.
Thanks a million, Cian. And can may I add to that as well? The thing that I was most impressed with around this year and last year especially, but I remember this year more, was how the likes of yourself and your peers communicated. I saw so many on the media, and I was like, are these guys media trained? They're communicating far more effectively than any of our politicians or any of our leaders. And it was just a natural communication style because it was actually human and it was from the heart. And right now, where I am doing this Zoom call, I'm in my old childhood bedroom. I'm cocooning my parents I've been here 12 months. And I look around this room and I remember doing my Leaving Cert, and I remember, I'm not going to be too graphic, but I remember vomiting at the end of my bed with the idea of, if Yates doesn't come up here, I am screwed. And just dealing with it on its own was awfully difficult for not just me, but all my peers. Like I still have nightmares about it, and I'm not overselling it. How has the experience of the Leaving Cert in COVID been for you, Cian, and your mates this year? Because at the end of the day, everyone's talking about it, but no one's really talking to the students. Yeah. What is your experience? And if you can give us a bit of an understanding of what's it like with the other students down in Ennis, and I'm sure you've talked to others around the country.
I've been in contact with a lot of students online about the stuff that we're dealing with. I suppose, like everyone, the pandemic was tough for students. We knew we were coming into a year where it was high stakes. You're ever since you start education, you're in the build up to your Leaving Cert, and each year you're getting closer and closer, and the pressure starts piling up. And when we entered the lockdown around January or Christmas, I remember panicking because I was thinking, look, how much school am I going to lose out on? Because I remember I had friends from Leaving Cert 2020 telling me about the nightmare they had to endure. And the thought of having to put up with that myself was a lot to deal with, as well as just the normal difficulties in a lockdown. You're missing out on your friends. I remember I turned 18 during lockdown, couldn't celebrate an 18th. Lots of different stuff like that. You're missing out on your normal life and your normal coping mechanisms. And just learning to deal with stuff alone and having to deal with the online classrooms, which are great, but there was a lot of issues across the board with online classrooms, be it internet, you name it, access to devices. So a lot of students had difficulty there. And it's just exhausting. I found myself, like, I engaged with the online work greatly and was supported by all my teachers and staff. But just the daily grind of getting up to the same desk in the same room, staring at a screen for hours. And then when you're finished with the screen, you're at the same desk doing your work. And then you have to do study, and there's little breaks, and you don't have the social aspect of school to rely on and to chat to your mates and to actually sit down with teachers and chat to them if you're stuck. So I found that really difficult.
It's very interesting that you say this. So let's break this down to actually the brain for a second. How difficult it is to deal with that if you're sitting looking at a screen for 8 hours in a day, and then you have to sit down to actually concentrate on study, or actually kind of really gauging and understanding the information that you would have went through the classroom. It's not an effective way to learn, and it's not an effective way to bring in information and to hold information. And actually, as you said, for me, when I was in school, I was a very curious student. So I used to ask a lot, I used to talk a lot, and I used to be very engaged. But I do remember there was always a release. The release was that playing football at lunchtime, or doing something, or actually just talking shite with my mates, and that interaction. And I look at the Leaving Cert now, and I worry. I personally believe the Leaving Cert isn't a really great description of a person's intelligence anyway. I think some people are good at that type of stress scenario, some aren't. And that does not make you any less than any other person. We all deal with stress in a certain way. For example, Leaving Cert stuff for me was okay because I'm good in stress, even though I had anxiety disorder all my life. I was very good in stress situations. And I had a mate of mine in St. Mary's in Mullingar, where I went to my Leaving Cert, and he was the smartest guy in the class by a country mile, but he couldn't function in stress. He just couldn't. And I used to watch him, and like, it was weird. This sounds weird, but I used to hold his hand sometimes in exams because he would get so overwhelmed. And it wasn't a panic attack. It was just, he just got so overwhelmed, and he nearly failed his Leaving Cert because he couldn't sit in a room. And I just thought, is this an effective way to really gauge this individual's ability, or his ability to learn? And luckily, he went on, and he's very successful now. He was always going to be successful because he's so clever. But I remember thinking, and then I was watching the Leaving Cert 2020 unfold, because like it was slightly novelty there. Because if honestly, Cian, I'll be honest, if somebody told me, like in September, October, listen, you're not doing your Leaving Cert, I'd be like, oh, sweet, and then I think back, well, would I have been like that? And I was watching the 2020 unfold. Did you ever imagine your class would be in the same boat? Can I ask you a question seriously? And it's important that we're not going to get too heavily into politics here, but does not really, really make you angry? You're 18 now, by the way, so you're a voter. So
Yeah.
you terrify politicians now, because this realm of 18-year-olds who've come in, who've been treated rather abysmally, if I have to be perfectly honest. I could imagine not many of you are that impressed with how the political systems dealt with you, and how they just didn't get this right. Like, they just didn't. It just seemed like an utter car crash from last year, and it was just a longer car crash into this year. Did you ever imagine you were going to be in that boat?
I tell you one thing, Bressie, just looking back from last year and the mistakes and the stress and all the problems they faced with getting the calculated grades in for Leaving Cert 2020, I remember thinking to myself, look, there's no way we'll be in the same boat. Like like I knew the pandemic would go on well into my Leaving Cert year, and I knew there'd be chances of variants because it's just natural viruses, and we even learned that in biology in sixth year. But to think that they didn't have a plan B for us in the worst case scenario was absurd to me. And I took to media straight away. I did an interview with the Clare Echo, which is my local newspaper. And I said in that interview that they're looking at 60,000, roughly 60,000 students, all majority of whom are at the voting age. And when it comes to the election, and when they come knocking for our votes and stuff, after this constant next week we'll have clarity for you. And they put us through basically 6 weeks of hell. We didn't know what we were working towards, and it was awful. And when they come looking for our votes, and I said it in the interview, we will remember that.
I think it's important to point this out, Cian, as well. Like, the most important group of people right now in our country, I feel, are our youth, they're the only people showing leadership in social change. I've theories behind that because I believe that young people's generally agenda is right and wrong. They don't think about all the other bullshit that comes into politics and economics and all that other stuff. And if we're going to shift anything around things like this, our mental health, we need those 60,000 to stand up and go, this is the shit that we care about. This is the stuff that we want to change. And that 60,000 needs to understand how truly powerful they are, because there has been over years, there's been slightly, sometimes young people will say, well, my vote is that, does it really make it? That could shift an entire manifesto if 60,000 people went, this is what we care about. This is what we want to change. And that's so empowering. And what I felt was done to the youth throughout this Leaving Cert was disempowering. They disempowered you. They took the decisions away from you. And you, to me, you were the main stakeholders here. You were the first people that should have been addressed. Yes, the teachers had an impossible job. And then what happened within the media is they were used as scapegoats. Teachers and healthcare professionals are the two most important groups in our society. And I can't, and that's what happened. They started playing politics with it. And breaking all that down, remember that, Cian, remember how powerful your voice is. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I am telling you right now, potentially, you're the most powerful voice in the country if you can rally around it and if you drive that change. Because that's how politics works. It doesn't work around generally good causes. It works around what are people going to vote for. What have you missed the most during lockdown, after lockdown? Like this whole period of your life, you turned 18. When I turned 18, like I turned 40 in the lockdown the same day as Kim Kardashian. She went to a private island with her mates, and I had macaroni and cheese with my mum. But that's just what we got to deal with. So we'll have a joint 1840th when this is all over, Cian. What
Sounds
have you
good.
missed the most during lockdown? Like genuinely, apart from all this messing with the Leaving Cert, has it been really difficult, that social interaction? How important are your friends to you?
Well, personally, like I go to a very small school, so a lot of my classmates I've known since I was 4 years old, and the majority of us turned 18 over lockdown, and we couldn't celebrate anyone's birthday. And to be honest with you, like I'm very aware that I've known these people the majority of my life, and in September we're all taken off to different colleges and stuff. So I was very aware that this was my last year of school, and Leaving Cert aside, this was my last year with all of these mates in the same class for the rest of my life. So I really missed out on the social aspect of it, and I really regret that that happened.
And with the social stuff thing, I mean, that people call it this rite of passage, but I think slightly is a slightly condescending term sometimes. But I do think that, so what I'm going to do, right, and you can do it if you want. In my eyes, I'm only 39 because they took a year off me. So you can be 17 if you want, and you can celebrate your 18th next year, and I'm going to celebrate my 40th next year or this year, whatever it is. Do you do with that type of social interaction, you know, going through something like this and the Leaving Cert debacle, sometimes the support of your friends is the most important part. The ability to turn to your peers and just go, Jesus, lads, this is a shit show, and you could just go for a walk. And you didn't even have that. It felt, you know. Have you found like some of your friendships have started to suffer when you don't have school and nightlife and sports events and that common ground that you have? I mean, I'm old enough and bold enough to know I've kind of done all my messing, but being 17, 18 years of age, your job is kind of to fuck up a little bit because that's how you learn. That's how and I don't mean that like it's kind of, you got to try some, that's youth. And I certainly did. I swear to God, if social media existed when I was 18, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I'd be Mountjoy, I'd say. But have you found some friendships started to suffer? Have you found certain friends were able to cope with it better than others? And did you get worried about any of your friends?
I did. I definitely lost contact with a few friends friends that I wouldn't have been in school with. But I suppose we're fortunate that we have so many different outlets that we can actually rely on to stay in contact with people, social media, FaceTime, and the like. And in a funny kind of turn of events, I actually became closer to a lot of people throughout that, because I was able to engage with them throughout any hour of the day, send them a text. And we did a lot of FaceTimes and group chats, because we knew we needed to support each other, and how vital that was to keep up. Because I think a lot of us were worried about that we would start falling out of touch. And I think the thing we were really trying to avoid, we were trying to avoid any of our friends becoming isolated during this.
And did you manage that?
We did, yeah, thank God. Thank
See,
God.
I think that's the stuff I've been hearing quite a bit, and I kind of maybe speak a little bit about my teenage years where I wasn't well. You know, I struggled with a pretty chronic panic disorder and general anxiety disorder from the age of 13 to the age of 30. But the thing about it was, when I was a teenager, I didn't have the language to describe what I was experiencing. I couldn't tell you. I thought I was possessed by the devil. I swear to God. I thought it was like a viable option in the 90s. And I used to think for the whole of my teenage years that I had asthma because I couldn't breathe. And I look at young people now, and although they have a lot to navigate, I do believe they have the language to communicate now and talk about this stuff and actually describe it and actually realize that it's not about being broken, it's about being human. And do you find that young people and your kind of peers and friends and colleagues are far more able to communicate around their emotional needs and their mental health right now?
Definitely do, yeah. Something I'm very passionate about, because I've suffered with my own mental health as well, is that there still is, now it's improving every day, thank God, but there still is a bit of a stigma around mental health, and more so even mental illness. And just going back to the staying in contact with my friends and stuff, something that really worried me recently that I saw on RT News just last night, there was an article from the Children's Ombudsman, and he said, unfortunately, his office had actually been contacted by students who had become suicidal from the incredible pressure and from the isolation of being alone. And it just showed me how fortunate I was to have friends that I could rely on to open up if I was finding it tough, and to talk to and have that support.
Yeah, and I know Niall, the ombudsman, very well. He's actually on our steering committee for our schools program, and I speak to him about this. And I think the reality is, it's just not natural. It's not a natural situation, and that brings me back to the Leaving Cert. When we look, do you feel that the decision makers in all this really didn't consider the mental health of the people doing the Leaving Cert? Do you think they really just got caught up in not wanting to be wrong? And that's generally what happens in politics. People are too afraid to admit that they don't know what they're doing, or they're not sure they made the right decision. Because Norma Foley is a good, she's a nice woman. She had an impossible job, and probably layers and layers of bureaucracy to make decisions, and unions and all the other stuff that comes with it. But do you think they were genuinely thinking about how truly overwhelming this was going to be to students?
I don't, if I'm honest. I feel like definitely at the start of it all, there really was disregard for students' well-being. And a lot of students that I talked to, even on social media, I used to put out questions asking students how they were coping. And one student said, and this really stuck with me, he said, it's like our mental health is a tennis ball, and the unions and the government are playing tennis back and forth with it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, the kind of pretty good description of what it seemed like from my perspective. And like what we were trying to do throughout it, I remember, because I'd be watching the news each evening with my mum and dad, and be sitting down going, oh, could you imagine that? Could you imagine just, should I study? Should I bother my arse? Should I try to learn? What should I learn? Is this going to come up? If we haven't had a chance to learn it, why are we can't come up with the actual Leaving Cert? So what's going to happen in your exams? Are they just going to be like half a question? Like, because you've only done, if you're lucky, you've only done half curriculum, and that was probably last year anyway. So it's very hard to keep up. I know you're doing it within your school setting, but how much of the curriculum are you actually getting to?
Yeah, that's something we were constantly playing around with between ourselves and stuff. And I was always asking my teachers, That's what I was really worried about. I was worried that we were going to be put through an exam that didn't actually reflect the amount of time that we actually had missed. Thankfully, now that's not the case, but students were so stressed about that. And I think the main thing students just wanted to know is they wanted to know what they were working towards, because it's so tough to be there for 6 weeks straight, studying and trying to get coursework done, and the teacher's doing a fantastic job with the online work, which is tough to keep going through. But to sit there, I remember myself, I was sitting there studying something, and I sat back and I thought, like, Jesus, is this even going to come up in the exam? Do you know what I'm saying? Like what kind of exam are we going to get? So like the clarity just to know what you're building towards would have made all the difference.
I think it was like people say, like one of the biggest fuelers of anxiety is uncertainty. It's like fertilizer for anxiety. So if you want to make loads of people anxious, throw loads of uncertainty at it. And what we've seen with this current pandemic, which was really difficult for our government, they had to make really difficult decisions. They had many different people looking for them to make those decisions. So I'm not in any way saying that this was easy for them, but what wasn't good, what was very, very poor, and has continued to be very poor, and something that you guys should, and something that I've been so impressed with you guys, is communication. Good, clear, concise, and compassionate communication. Because if you communicate effectively, you don't leave any gaps and you reduce uncertainty. Even if she came out and guys, listen, this is not happening. If she just, and she couldn't make that decision, but it was the level of uncertainty and how that grew. And it didn't really feel like you were in a safe pair of hands then. Did you find the longer it went on and the more uncertainty that was introduced to the equation, did it just completely ignite your anxiety levels? Was it just like, was it anger or anxiety or frustration, or was it just a big cocktail of all three?
I have to say it's actually a cocktail of all three. Um, the the anxiety amongst students, like I can't emphasize this enough. How many students contacted me saying like that their anxiety was through the roof, sleepless nights, and the frustration, and that they were just in a really bad headspace. A lot of students told me that they literally just felt defeated. You know, like they felt like they just weren't being listened to by the government, and that it was being thrown between government and unions, and that the students themselves, they had to really fight to get a voice in the middle of this. Now, thankfully, we have the ISSU that did a fantastic job, and we wouldn't be where we are now without them. But I definitely feel like students had to fight to get themselves heard. And a lot of students stood up to the task, and they decided, you know, we can sit here and we can whine about the unfairness of it all, or we can actually do something about it and stand up for ourselves here.
Did you feel dismissed?
I did. Definitely at the beginning, I did, yeah.
You know, that's not good enough, you know, and at the end of the day, I keep going back to the power that you have. Like, you might feel like my main drive in what we're doing with Lust for Life is to empower youth, is to actually, if you empower youth, it's a different kettle of fish. What I felt the whole situation was disempowering. And you talked about a voice, um, you weren't given one, apart from the work that you said of the groups that did some amazing work, and I saw them on TV, and I was like, wow, this is effective ways to actually drive change. And it was really encouraging to watch how respectful as well, and how to have debates on TV. Because I don't know what it was, but one of the, I think the the president of the organization that you just said there was on and was debating on with somebody on, I think, Ireland AM, and the person that was debating with just didn't know how to debate with somebody who was actually so versed but so respectful and actually on the money. And I remember watching it going, Jesus Christ, he absolutely owned them. And it was on Ireland Day. I hadn't even woken up at that point. But I do feel, when I looked at the stakeholders there, I think if anything comes out of this madness and chaos, is to understand that you know, no more should they ever do that to you. They should never ever disempower you or take your voice away like that. And I think with the Leaving Cert, that's what happened. And you shouldn't have had to go through that. That should have been dealt with. That should have been dealt with last summer, before they came in, when we knew maybe September, October, that this was getting serious again. because it was, and we knew it was getting serious. They should have been in there day and night, and they should have prioritized that, and they should have known that this was going to happen. But then we found a few months later, and in that period of time, how many young people got acutely overwhelmed, started, having serious anxiety issues, not sleeping, not, all the other shit that comes with that. When I think about it all, Cian, if it were to happen again, if this whole thing was happening again, how would you like the government to have dealt with it? How do you think they should have done this?
First of all, I'd have liked the government to acknowledge the situation they had left the students in and just have been a bit upfront about, look, we have messed up here. We should have had a plan B in place for a rather predictable situation, especially in a pandemic. And definitely to have actually not left the students fighting to get their voices out there, and to have actually listened, look, students are at the center of this. It's the students' exam. It's the students that are going through it right now with their studies and the uncertainty. So we're actually going to listen to the students here and actually not have to have them jumping on radios, getting into newspapers, hoping, fingers crossed, that whatever they're putting out in the media will actually be listened to and taken seriously.
And it's your future.
That's our future, difference. Exactly.
And I think, I often, when the Leaving Cert rolls around, I always laugh at the people like me and my mates who put up kind of tweets going, oh, it's not, it's not all that, don't worry about it, there's more to life. I'm like, it's kind of a stupid thing to say to somebody when they're facing into it. Like, doesn't really help. Well, I remember like my uncle used to say to me, oh, yeah, I'm like, don't fucking dare say it to me. Like, I am in, like, the whole idea of that kind of dismissing thing. I still have cold sweats about it. I swear to God, guys, I still wake up sometimes going, fuck, Yates, I can't believe he didn't come up. And like, I had Yates nailed, and fucking Kavanagh came up. And then the funny thing is, like, if in school we were taught about mental health, I might have understood Shakespeare, because if you look at all the Shakespeare stuff, most of the people, the main characters in his play, had mental health problems, and we were never addressed to this. Do you think one of my main passions, Cian, is the fact that I went through my whole secondary system seriously struggling, and I really wished, the only time I ever talked about mental health was when Kurt Cobain, who was my hero, died. And Kurt Cobain died by suicide, and I asked my teacher, he was a Christian brother, what happened, and he slammed his fist on my desk and he called him a coward and told me to shut my mouth. And that was my mental health education. And when I look back at that, that's what drives my passion for why I believe that our education system has to seriously look at this now in a very tangible, real way. Is the education system, or the system that you've just gone through as a second year student, has it stepped up at all within mental health in terms of education, or do you feel it might still be just a box tick?
I do think there's a lot of room to improve. Especially I've looked at different ways, we'll be talking about like Leaving Cert reform and stuff. And one of the arguments I've seen popping up all over the place is students have asked maybe that instead of 6 subjects, reduce it to 5. So that would leave more space for different things such as PE, career guidance, mental well-being, and just mindfulness in schools. Because I definitely think even from primary school, if we introduce mental awareness, mental well-being, just get the conversation started about mental health, to show kids just how important it is to obviously look after their physical health, but their mental health is just as important. Because if your mental health isn't, shall we say, what it should be, you're going to struggle, especially in school. And if you're running up to a Leaving Cert exam or any end of year exam, which I just don't think is up to the task, because look, that exam's been around since 1925. It's nearly 100 years ago. I definitely think in regards to society and learning, there's so many different ways to learn and so many different ways to be assessed. And 2020 and 2021 have shown that we really can change the ballgame when it comes to assessing students at the end of their school experience, shall we say. If you're struggling mentally, you're not going to give off an accurate representation of your abilities throughout school. And especially this build up to this week in June that you're going through. The second you start secondary school, it's in the back of your mind. And the second you come into fifth year, that's all that's talked about is the Leaving Cert, the Leaving Cert, the Leaving Cert. And it's this high stake exam. And you start getting stressed because what you are necessarily entering at the moment, whether people like to admit it or not, it's a points race is what it is. And it's become less about, shall we say, learning subjects, enjoying subjects, and exploring not just the aspect of being able to take out a textbook, read the text, learn the facts, and regurgitate that onto paper. There's so many different aspects to learning, but that's what it really is set up to. And you're not going into the Leaving Cert exam now to learn about a subject and to really enjoy it. You're going in to fill out an exam paper so you can compete with all these other students for those vital places in college. I think it's past time that's changed. And we've known this for a long time. We've known for ages that the Leaving Cert needs to be reformed, it needs to be changed. And the way the exam is now, it's just not up for the task. And this situation that I find myself in now, I think that really highlights it.
Brilliant answer, Cian. And I also think you see how difficult it is to do any form of change in the education system, to make a decision in the education system, how difficult that is, and how many different stakeholders have to be involved, and how the fact that our current education minister won't be our education minister in 2 years, and then they change shop again, and then you have to start all over again. So to do that type of change needs a cross-party solution to this, where all parties agree that this is not the best way to educate young people. I truly don't believe it is. I truly believe it isn't. I have been a massive advocate of a man called Ken Robinson, who has a brilliant TED talk called Killing Creativity. I believe that people should be educated in what they're passionate about. I do, and I think that would drive, that's what they do in many countries in Scandinavia. I think our teachers would be happy to do it. Our teachers are incredible. I think it's the fact that it would require bravery and courage, and it would require real change, but it's going to be difficult. And if we don't do it now, after what the shit show that you've had to deal with, if this isn't our unique opportunity to talk about reforming this Leaving Cert, I don't know what is. And if this is, like you talked about, young people in primary schools, our Lust for Life are now in a number of primary schools. We'll be in every primary school in Ireland, you know, within the next 2 years with our schools program, which is aiming to do exactly what you talked about. And then our aim is secondary systems. And then we look at things like digital literacy, media literacy, teaching young people the fact that most information that we see isn't real. And that's the stuff that's overwhelming us all. The thing about it is, when I look at the Leaving Cert now, Cian, honestly, hand on my heart, because I got very interested in it when I watched everything you were going through. It's the same curriculum I did. Tell me it's not a different world. 1998, I did my Leaving Cert. It is unrecognizable to what I had a Commodore 64 in 1998. It took nearly 3 hours to load a computer game. And I'm not, you know, I'm coming across like I'm old, but this is a different, unrecognizable world that requires a different set of skills to navigate. And we have to teach young people that education is not just learning something from a piece of paper and regurgitating it onto another piece of paper. When you go to college, Cian, and you're doing something you love, like I did, it's a joy. It's a joy to sit reading stuff. You're sitting there going, oh my God, that's amazing. And you come home and you start talking shite to your parents about it. Oh, would you believe this? They don't care. It's a joy to learn something you're truly passionate about. And there might be subjects in the Leaving Cert that you are, but that's where third level becomes just so interesting. And that is, do you think in secondary level that young people should be given the opportunity to be educated in something that they love or they're passionate about? And even if they change their mind when they're 17, I was a professional athlete at 19 or 20. I then went into music. I then went into banking. I then went into fucking TV. I threw as much shit at a wall and see what sticks. And that's my career. But you know, I wasn't educated in any of them. I was told music was a waste of time. And I'm going to leave this long answer to you, because sorry, I'm talking shite now. But a teacher in my school, when I was asked in my junior cert what I wanted to be when I grew up, when I got older, when I left school, essentially, I said I wanted to be a musician. And he called me a waster and told me to stop dreaming. That same teacher told another student in my class the very same thing a number of years later, and his name was Niall Horan. And that day I went back to do a speech in my old school. He was still there. And I left an Irish Times rich list that said Niall Horan was worth 120 million on his desk.
My
No
God.
one has no one has a right to tell you not what to do or what to dream of. Nobody has that right. Nobody. And that is the empowerment that young people need. Do you feel now is the opportunity to change this?
Definitely going off what you said, thankfully I've fantastic teachers who really do support me. Um, but touching off those subjects, I know myself, my favorite subject's biology, and I'm really passionate about it, and I intend on chasing that in college. But there's some subjects on the curriculum, and students have said this to me because I've asked, that they're not learning because they enjoy it or they're interested in it. They're learning to get points. They're learning because they're like, I need to get the H2 in this subject because it's going to help me get to my career, which is nothing to do with said subject in college. And I think it's vital we choose a new assessment. And I think, yet again, this has shown us that it leads students into courses that it's not suiting their ability to go into an exam hall and just get lucky with points. It suits their aptitudes and intelligences, and it encourages the forms of learning that they'll need in college that'll benefit them both as a person, and it will also benefit society. Because if we look at where we are now in time in the society we're living in, there are students in school now studying subjects that will prepare them for jobs that don't even exist yet.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing that's changing consistently. And I always look at, like, when I was going into college, everybody was being told you need to go and do commerce and work in a bank. And everybody who did, the banks crashed. Literally, as we finished college, the banks crashed. You see, all these decisions, you should do what you want to do, that your heart and soul. Like, biology is an incredible. We saw now over the last 12 months how incredible science is. Science is the new rock and roll. You know what I mean? And that's the reality of it. And I think, to me, when you go to third level and you get to experience third level, I hope you get to experience it fully and truthfully. Because a lot of third level students in first year, your 2020 class, didn't get to do that. What does college look like for you? Like, what's the plan?
College for me, it looks like, first off, like you said, I'll be doing a subject that I'm interested in. And it's not going to be learning this and just putting myself through hours of just frustration nearly at a subject that I'm not getting, that I don't love. I'll be doing something I'm passionate about. But college is so much more than that to me right now. I'm looking at college and it's like this bright light at the end of this dark tunnel that is the lockdown and the mess that was the Leaving Cert. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, like, you know, I'm interested in going to NUIG. And something I've been looking at in NUIG is rowing. And I'm thinking, do you know what? Like, I'm mad into running, and I find running as an escape. But I'm going to use college to explore other sports and to socialize and to just get loads of different experiences, get involved in students' unions, get involved in different societies inside in college, and just meet people and just grow as a person.
That's what it's for. And I really hope you have the opportunity to do that. And I do think that the crap that you've all gone through and dealt with, as truly horrible and difficult, not just the pandemic, but the whole Leaving Cert option. Like, I don't see this as a wasted 12 months. I see it as, it probably has built an awful lot of lived experience in people, because there's going to be other shit shows that come your way, Cian. Like, there just is. It's just life. I've dealt with an array of shit shows since I was 18, 19 years of age, and I'll continue to. And actually, the crap that you've all gone through now, you know, might be that very thing that allows you able to deal with the other crap that comes your way, you know, within college and stuff like that. And I think, you know, bringing it once more back to what happened this year, and more importantly, your voice and how you're going to use it from now on. What I'd love to see happen out of all this and the Leaving Cert, and what is and how the whole debacle happened, I would love to see a real revolution in youth voting, and how young people submerge themselves and understand that every single thing that happens in politics affects you. Every single thing. And there's this detachment generally through youth and politics. You know, some young people I would have worked with, well, you know, it doesn't really affect me. It really does. And they try to pretend it doesn't. But when it comes down to it, every single decision that's made in the Dáil in Kildare Street affects you, and now we know. So I think what this might do is make young people far more passionate in the people who are making decisions that affect their future. And whether that's climate change, whether that's education, whether that's mental health, whatever it is, this is the thing I've been trying to get into people's heads over the last 6 years. We need to start voting for people who actively care about these things. And the way they'll care about them is if you guys vote for this. That is the only language they understand. And I think we need to make politics more and more relevant. And what happened, and the reason you had to deal with all this shit, Cian, was politics. It was power. Nobody wanted to admit power. It was a game. And that's what happened. You were a tennis ball. And unfortunately, an awful lot of people were badly affected by that. And I'm just, there's nothing I say. I'm just truly sorry that that's what you all had to go through. It's just, it's not acceptable. But I really hope it wasn't in vain.
I definitely think, Niall, like just looking out over the last 6 weeks, I've never seen so many of my peers so invested in politics, so, shall we say, interested in tuning into the news every day. Sadly, a lot of it in vain, waiting for that clarity that we were absolutely demanding. But what this has actually really shown, definitely my age group, is that we have a voice and we can actually make change with that voice, and that we will be listened to. That's what it's really shown it. And especially when you consider our age group, or 17, 18, 19, and we're coming up to the voting age, like you said, and we're living in extraordinary times, like you just mentioned there, climate change, mental health, all of these huge issues that we're all keenly aware about. And the torch, shall we say, is being handed down to our generation slowly. And we're well aware that we are the future of this country, we're the future of the planet. And it will be us in a few years, not that long away, who are the voice behind these and who are actually actively engaging with these issues. So what I suppose there is a silver lining to everything. And what this has really shown my generation is that we have a voice, and that voice is loud, and that voice will be listened to.
It needs to be listened. And the other thing I'll say to you on that, Cian, is you're inheriting a world that isn't good enough, because politics hasn't been good enough, because politics started believing that the only way to be successful was progress, progress, progress. So we rinsed the planet, we rinsed our resources, we rinsed all this stuff because they had 30 or 40 big, massive companies, corporate companies constantly telling them how to make decisions rather than making decisions on the behalf of people. And if you look at politicians and leaders like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, she doesn't do that. And that's the leadership that we now need to see. What I would love to see is young people getting into politics now and pushing out that mentality, because that mentality is why you're inheriting a shit world. And I mean that you're inheriting a world you shouldn't be inheriting. You're inheriting a country that still only spends 6% of its health budget on mental health. You're inheriting a country where most young people can't get a home and have no chances of getting home. I'm 40 and I don't own a home. This is the reality. You're inheriting a world where we've rinsed and burnt it. It's burning slowly because of greed, corruption, and the fact that decisions were being made not for the better of people, but for power. And if people like you and your friends, like, who's to say you can't, not that you might want to, but get into politics and actually scare them even more. And that is when we start seeing change. We're seeing, politicians like Holly Kearns now in Social Democrats who it's just stronger leadership. And I think you need to really use what you've gone through and recognize that these decisions will continue to happen and affect young people if something isn't done about it. And that is the thing that pissed me off the most about it all. You were dismissed. There's just no other way to put it. If I had kids, if I had an 18-year-old doing the Leaving Cert, I wouldn't have been able to tolerate that. You were dismissed, and it isn't good enough. And politics was played with your emotional well-being and your futures. And nobody has a right to do that.
Yeah, we were treated like children, Niall, and I think a lot of them forgot that they actually were dealing with 18-year-olds for the majority of it, and especially with that, like you said there, what they put us through and the uncertainty and the anxiety that this had on so many students. that didn't just disappear when we got the clarity. That didn't just puff up in smoke and it disappears and everyone's happy as Larry. There's still students now still suffering from that. And unfortunately for some, it's going to stick with them for quite a long time. And especially then in regards to politics, like I definitely think my generation are quite aware of the world we've been handed and just how badly it is. If you look at climate change, clock is ticking, and our generation is going to be the last one that can really influence that and shall we say flip the switch. And we're very aware of that. And I do have high hopes for my generation in politics. I do think politics is starting to change, and our generation will be bringing that change.
And one word of advice I'll give you, Anna Keane, and I mean this like honestly, and really, really ask everybody listen to this, ask yourself one thing: what are your values? What do you stand for? Like, what do you stand for? What you actually care about? And don't shift off that, because what happens is good people get offered bigger things or power or money, and then they sacrifice their values to take that. And that's what happens in politics. Good people get into politics, and then the political system breaks them down, and they start making decisions because of corruption and power and money and economics rather than on their values. So knowing what you stand for is so, so important. It really is. It's actually changed my life beyond recognition. Knowing every decision I make, I go back to my values. At A Lust for Life, we're sharing stories to finish, Keen, of hope, to try and keep people going through this mess. Would you mind sharing what your hope is after this pandemic and what you hope, and whether not become the new the kind of biologists, Nobel Prize winning biologists, but what is your hope after all this is over?
I think definitely just touching on biology, we've seen fantastic science throughout this pandemic that will help us combat future epidemics, pandemics, and stuff like that. We've learned so much from this situation. Students have learned exactly what they can achieve if they put their mind to it. And as well as that, on a personal note, I've learned how important it is to support people during tough times, and that if you can rely on your friends and chat about your what you're going through, what you're finding difficult, people will listen. People are there to help you, and it's shown me how important it is to have companionship with your friends, and just how important friends truly are. Like, I know it sounds kind of cliche, like friendship this and friendship that, but it has really shown me the importance of communication, because I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have my mates to chat to about what I was dealing with. Because there were periods during this lockdown, I'm sure like everyone watching this right now, that were really tough, definitely for me. And having that support there meant the world, you know. And I don't want to think about how it could have been if I didn't have that support. And I think a lot of people can relate to that.
No, I'm pretty sure you probably offer that support as well. And I think even the way you speak, the way you dress, and the way you talk, it's from the right place. And the one thing I've always prided myself on is my judge of character. And I think you need to bring that forward. And who knows, you might scrap the biology and get into politics, but I wouldn't advise it, to be perfectly honest. But Cian, I'm going to jump to some of the questions that we've got in the comments. Linda's a teacher got in touch to say that the frustration and stress also affects staff, and they have been finding out what's happening on RT as well. It's so shameful they didn't listen to teachers and students asking for a plan B this year. The big thing here for me is many of my good mates are teachers, and this has buried them. It actually buried them, because they, not just because it's been uncertain, it's because they know it's burying you and it's making you anxious. And teachers get into that profession because they're like nurses. They have that empathy and compassion, and they want education is such a skill. And like, you look at the communication strategy of the government. Our Taoiseach went on CNN to tell us we were going into lockdown, an international American news station to tell them that we were going into lockdown without telling us. We watched our Stephen Donnelly not know what was going on the other night. Like, we watched our Taoiseach go on like the Daily Star to tell us we're going into lockdown for, like, this is not okay. It's such poor communication, and teachers and students should not be finding out about this shit on the news. That is the problem, and the stakeholders weren't talked to. And to me, the whole thing comes back to respect and communication, and you were shown neither. And it's not good enough. And I don't think, I don't think they're bad people. I just don't think they have the skill set. And that's reality. Cian, there's a question here for you from Anne-Marie. I have found my college lecturers expect a lot more from us in the pandemic. Do you think the teachers have been the same?
Not my teachers, definitely. A few of my friends have expressed to me that there seems to be more work given to them now, and that unfortunately some teachers seem to treat the time that students have at home as like, look, oh, they've loads of time in their hands, we'll give them more work. I think it's important, and it's definitely it's so important that to remember that students should only be getting the work they'd normally be getting at school. Just because they're at home, it doesn't mean they've loads of this free time. They still have family, they still have different hobbies they're clinging on to for that support. But thankfully, my own teachers have been extremely supportive of me throughout this, and I'm very aware that just how much this affected them as well. Because to be honest, Lionel, like they were finding out about this stuff just as much as we were, and they were just as much in the dark as we were, and they really went above and beyond supporting us through that.
I'm delighted to hear that. And I'm delighted, some of my teachers that I loved in secondary school are still good friends of mine. And I think it's, you really don't realize how important a good teacher is until you really need to, I look at my English teacher. English was always my favorite subject. I adored it. I love poetry. I hate Yeats, but I love poetry because he didn't come up. But another question here: how do you maintain social connections in a time when you're not allowed to see people? Here's the thing: our entire brain is designed around social connection. We are conditioned and designed that way since we lived in caves. This is not normal for us. But one thing human beings is immensely adaptive. That's why we're still here. That's why we survived all this time. You can't kill us. We are that 0.1% that Dettol can't kill. Human beings are the most, they're Darwin, survival of the fittest, and we have evolved constantly to suit our surroundings. And what feels like a long time, and we feel like this is the depths of hell, and we're never getting out of it. We will adapt out of it again, but we need to take baby steps out of it. Be really gentle with yourself, and with social connection. We do know that social connection, it obviously is better face to face, but we do know what happens when people have to work on Zoom for 8 hours a day. They're not going to want to go and chat with their mates for 3 hours and Zoom down after. Their heads are fried. And I do believe that I have concerns over this. I have concerns over the way to build real emotional intelligence is face to face with people. You can feel it, their body language, their tone of voice. That's how you build empathy, and that's how you build compassion and all these really important traits of the human beings. I think you guys might be okay because you've probably built it all up already, and you've got a year in college. And I swear to God, lads, if you don't go there and milk the shite out of that and have the second year of your life and actually just rock it out of there, get that vaccine, shove it in your forehead, and go and party for 12 months. My Jesus Christ, you deserve it. So you'll make up for the social connections next year. That's how I look at it. But be careful. That's all I'll say. I have another question for you here, Cian. Hold on, I'm just going to read it out. It's a question from Ursula, a guidance counsellor back in school on Monday, and would like to know how to help. What would be the best way? How can we deal with the lack of motivation when lockdown has made schools seem insignificant in the wider context of the world? And what advice would you give someone who is worried about the future? So essentially, I think what Ursula is asking, as a guidance counsellor, what would be the most effective forms of support for you and your peers?
Be upfront with us, honestly, and just sit down with us and just tell us straight what you yourself feel of this situation. Because something that I find personally really helps me, especially with guidance counselors, if the guidance counselor speaks to you, not as a student, but just speaks to you as a person and just tells you, like, look, I know what you've gone through, guys. I can relate to that. I've gone through this myself. And you can just speak to each other as not as a guidance counselor and a student in an office, but as two people who can just relate to each other. And I find just having that conversation, that down to earth conversation, helps so much.
I absolutely agree. There's a lot to be said for it. There's a question here. What advice would you give to someone worried about pursuing careers that might be oversaturated or even obsolete by the time we qualify? One thing I will absolutely say on that is I did economics and finance in college, and I ended up in psychology, ultimately in psychology and my master's, and 50 other careers in between. Honestly, follow your gut here. It's never wrong. And this idea, trying to think about what's going to be obsolete, if you develop good skill sets, you can apply them and change them to any different industry. Because we don't know if there could be robots literally doing everything in 15 years. And the only thing we have in robots, guys, the only thing we have in those feckers is emotion. Learn how to navigate emotion, understand it, connect with fellow human beings. That is the one thing, no matter what they tell you, that doctors won't be able, or robots won't be able to sort. There's another question here, Cian. It says, sorry, it just goes. A few people have said, do you have any advice for anyone struggling with their mental health during this time in particular? I'm just going to say something about this. You absolutely should be struggling. It's a very rational reason to be struggling. It's a rational reason to be overwhelmed, distressed, anxious. It doesn't feel nice, but your brain is actually only doing its job right now. And it's doing a wonderful job. Your brain's job is to keep you alive. And if you're feeling anxious and stressed right now, it's because there's a pandemic on. And the best thing I will say around mental health is let yourself feel that. Don't feel that there's something wrong with you or there's something broken in you or weak in you, because I'm feeling it. I'm going out to the back garden screaming at birds every now and again. I am losing my mind. But that's normal. That's humanity. That's okay. And sometimes the best way to deal with our mental health is to let ourselves feel it all. And finally, I'll say around that, people always think compassion is about, Care Bears, all lovey-dovey stuff and giving hugs. Compassion isn't that. What compassion truly is, guys, is recognizing that every human on earth is imperfect. Our whole brains were designed arseways. We are completely imperfect. Our designs are imperfect. There's cracks in us all. That Leonard Cohen quote that I have in my arm, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. We are all cracked. If you can bring a bit of compassion to your cracks, that changes everything. And remember, as Cian said, most importantly, the most important part of all this, and please remember this when this is all over, is your relationships. Like, I interviewed 10 people in a nursing home. 3 of them, unfortunately, have passed away at Christmas. And I asked them all the same question at 95 years of age. What matters to you in life? They went, family and my friends, and nothing else at 95. And that's the shit that should matter to you now. So don't worry about things being obsolete or maybe not the career. Develop strong relationships, develop connection, and you'll be grand. You'll find yourself getting in there. There's another question here, I think, for you, Cian. I'm a teacher and guidance counselor. I think it's more a point. I just want to say that the young people today, like Cian, are the light in this darkness. The future is brighter. These young people have completely shown how far emotionally intelligent they are in comparison to the politicians and government. Be proud and keep going, and don't forget to vote. I couldn't agree more. I mean that, Cian, and it's not being a condescending, patronising prick. I honest to God, that's the stuff that matters. That's the stuff. That's what makes you successful. That makes people want to work with you. If I was the CEO of a company and somebody came in to me and I got 600 points in my Leaving Cert, and Cian walks in, I'm hiring him because he can communicate, because he's got emotional intelligence, because he'll be able to work with people, and never forget that stuff. And I work a lot with businesses and CEOs. They all said the same thing. That's really important. I think we have time for one more question. I'm just going to go through them. It's for you, Cian, I think. It's actually another point about how awesome you are, Cian. I agree. Is there anything you want to finish with or say to people, Cian?
Yeah, definitely. If there's anyone at all, or definitely people my age who are asking have I any tips on how to deal with the anxiety and just look after your mental health? Obviously, relationships are a huge part of it, but something I found that really helps me, and I've been through the works with mental health. I suffered quite badly, and something that became my crutch through it all was physical exercise, running. That's what was my support. Because no matter how bad I felt, if I could get out for a run, I felt 10 times better coming back from that. And if I'd love to explore the relationships between physical health and mental health, because they work together. And if you're not getting out, getting some air during this, and if you're sitting in your room for days on end doing schoolwork, you're going to burn out and you're going to crash. So if you're not doing it already, get out there and get some form of exercise in, because it really does make the difference.
And the most prescribed form of therapy now in the UK is ecotherapy, nature. Go outside. It is built. Now we're getting half decent weather. Get out there, breathe it in. It is so, so important. You're dead right. And you don't have to go out breaking 10K speed records. You can go out. I am the worst runner if you've ever seen, Cian. The state of me running. But I just like getting outside and just moving and just breathing and just recognizing. And another thing that might help you guys is mindfulness. I know I talk about it a lot, but all the good stuff in life is already here. It's right in front of your nose, and we're missing it. We're missing it all. And that's the only regret I have at my 40 years of age, is that I spent so much of my life thinking that happiness lay in achievement and goals, and it lay in getting somewhere all the time. And I was blinded about going there. And maybe that's what the Leaving Cert might feel like for you guys, is that you're so hell-bent on getting to the Leaving Cert that you're missing this stuff that's happening around you every day that's really important. Even in a pandemic, you're missing it. And all I will say, and my final words and that stuff, is don't miss that stuff, because chasing a life, we ultimately miss living one. And that is the only advice I give to you, whether you're a teacher, student, a parent. There's such amazing shit happening right in front of our faces, and we just don't give it enough respect. And that's nature, that's family, relationships, that's a dog shitting on your kitchen floor. That's horror. This is just be mindful of this stuff, and be mindful of what you've all gone through, and realize and recognize that it wasn't lost time. You've built something strong within you. And when, as I said, the next adversity comes your way, because it does, trust me, you will feel like you have the tools to deal with it, because it'll feel like you've done it before. And I think that's the most important part. So listen, we're going to wrap this up. Cian, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I think you're going to be okay. I really, really, really hope you and your peers find a way to put this behind you now and go forth and conquer. And as I said, next year, have the fucking time of your lives. Really, just have the time of your lives, and milk it and enjoy it.
Yeah,
So,
and
thanks
I just like to thank you, Bressie, for giving me the opportunity to come on here and get this advice out to students, and definitely for all the work you do for mental health. I know you're an absolute role model to me, to a lot of my mates, and you've helped so much of my generation. You've no idea. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. And just to finish on your point as well, just to anyone my age or anyone at all watching this right now, this will end, and we are on the way to great stuff. There are great stuff coming down the road. It's not that far away. We're coming to the end of it, and life's going to get better, and it's going to keep going. So just make every moment count.
Keen for Taoiseach. That's my final word. Keen for Taoiseach. 12 years time, if you're not in Kildare Street and I'm not getting a free pass to get in there and get free pints in their bar there, I'll come for you. Keen for Taoiseach. That's my final words. Thanks so much for coming, guys.
No worries. Thanks, guys.
Pleasure. Take care.